Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I'm your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, The Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm Alton Gansky, the author of about 45 books, director of the Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference, and whatever else I can find to do. How you doing, Aaron?
Doing all right. How about yourself?
Well, I'm getting by for a guy my age, my situation in life.
You've been busy this week?
Yeah, I've got two projects going. I got the private client project, and I'm well underway on it now. But it's slow going. And then I'm also working on my portion of the Harbinger series. Angie Hunt's book, Infestation, comes out in a couple of weeks, and mine's next after that, The Fog. And so I've got that to do too, and a few other things. So I'm not wandering the streets.
You're finding a way to fill all those hours.
Yeah.
So, while your wife is away.
Yeah. And then my agent is pushing a proposal, and we just found out one of the books is going to go to. It's made it past the first hurdle and is going to go to the pub board in early September. So, you know what that means? Nothing.
Means you get to wait more? Yeah. The Bargain was, I think, before 4 or 5 different pub boards, and before Lighthouse finally took it. So it's a journey. I mean, it's still an accomplishment to get there, though. Don't sell yourself short. It's still an accomplishment to get there. Still something to rejoice, but it's doesn't necessarily mean publication is imminent.
It's always good when you get past the acquisitions editor. They didn't spit on it or throw it away, so that's good. And then when it goes to the pub board, it really just means there's more people to reject it. But there's still life and hope. And I think there were 6 publishers that wanted to see the proposal. So who knows? I might even have more work to do. Yeah.
I often wonder if some publishers just have a massive dumpster out back that's titled Pub Board.
Yes.
We'll send that over to the pub board real quick.
That's right.
So.
Yeah. It's a dumpster in the back.
Dumpster in the back. I don't know. Some publishers maybe. Well, I got word some couple contracts that we're pursuing with my agent. One contract offer and another one that we're pursuing. So hopefully I'll have some good news that I can share before too much longer. But also heard from Lighthouse, my publisher. And if you'll notice, all you astute viewers out there, my lower third here is a little bit different. It's bookgrabber, grabbr.com/books/3450. And what that is a website you can actually access an advanced reader copy of The Hand of Adonai and the Book of Things to Come. So if you want to start reading early, understanding that it's an advanced reader copy, which means it'll probably still have some typos in there, it's there. And I believe it's free. You cannot download it, but you can use the online web app where you can download the app to your smartphone and do it that way. But it's a good way if you don't want to wait till August 25th to start reading to get a jump start on that. And if you like it, shamelessly promote it to all your friends and family, and or just buy them all copies. That's something else that you could do if you really like it. If you hate it, just buy copies for the people you don't like. And I think that will be a win-win situation.
There were a couple of authors did a nonfiction book, and they wanted to be on the New York Times bestseller list. So they traveled around the country buying all the copies of their books from bookstores that would report to the New York Times list, and they got caught. Didn't go well for them. That's one way to end a career very quickly. They got enough sales, and for those who may not know what that is, certain bookstores report, and people like the New York Times book review and stuff like that, they gather that information. Not every bookstore reports, so it's a little iffy, but it's still pretty good. And but you have to sell a certain number of books in different locations, and so they went around and just bought them up themselves so they could get on the New York Times bestseller list. So it's considered unethical, and it's going to be hard for them to get another contract after that.
Well, unethical and expensive, I would imagine. In addition, you're playing on the, or counting on the ignorance of the salespeople to not notice that the name on the card that you're paying with is the same as the name on the book. The photo's the same on the back of the jacket. That might be a little mysterious, but
yeah, it was a business book, and they had a business, so they may have been using a business card and not their personal cards. But I've bought some of my books before. If I've given all mine away and I need a copy quick, I've done that. I've never had anyone notice my name on the card. Of course, I do it all through Amazon now, but way back when, I never had anyone notice the name on the card matching the name on the book. Sure. They don't pay that close attention. So,
no. Hopefully, they'll at least check the name on the card and the name on the license if we're lucky, right? So. But we should probably get into it. We've got a long night ahead of us. Well, we've got an hour ahead of us, but a lot of great information. But before we jump into that, we have 2 first line winners to announce tonight. The first is for our First Line Friday this week, won by perhaps a familiar name. She's won before, and recently too. I think it was a couple of weeks ago that she won. So this week's First Line Friday winner is Katie Osborne again. For her line, everything was impossibly loud when London regained consciousness. So a couple things to like about that line. I love the name London, by the way. Normally we tell people to avoid adverbs and adjectives, but I like the word impossibly paired up with loud. It's an interesting pairing there. And so we've got some conflict immediately. Somebody's regaining consciousness. So they were perhaps knocked out in some fashion or another, maybe in a coma or something like that. But we get the wake up a lot. And this is a little bit different in the sense that it's an unpleasant wake up, kind of like a Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis, where you wake up where Gregory Samsa wakes up as a giant cockroach. That's an unpleasant wake up story. And here we've got one that's perhaps not as exotic as a giant cockroach, but still a little bit of conflict there.
I read it as London is the city. That was my first thought. Showing you how wacky I am, I thought, wow, the whole city of London was unconscious. That's interesting. And didn't think about it being a person's name.
Either way, it works either way. We'll have to contact Katie and find out about that. But we're probably going to read line 2. And that's the important thing. So, but now the drum roll, please, for the second winner. This is for the July First Line Friday. So the whole shebang. This is our $15 gift card winner, who I've already notified. So I guess there's not a lot of suspense for the winner, but for everybody else there is. And that winner is Jenny Snow. So she was the winner of our popular vote at aarongansky.com, which I publicized on my Facebook and outlet. And so those people who went and vote got a pretty good turnout of voters, quite a few voters this week, this month. So I was very happy to see that. And I was happy to see that Jenny Snow won. So congratulations to you, Jenny Snow. You'll be getting a $15 gift card to the online retailer of your choice. And I'll get that processed probably, if not tonight, then tomorrow morning for you, I hope, if I remember. If not, just bug me on Facebook. You know where to find me. And that brings us to the publishing term of the week. You got one called tricolon?
Tricolon. I know it sounds either like a medical condition, or an overuse of a particular piece of punctuation, but it's neither one of those. Tricolon refers to a literary practice. So in a sense, it's a literary term, but it's also a publishing term. In case your editor ever edits a tricolon out of your work, you can always call them on it and say, hey, I worked hard on that tricolon. Then you can see if they know what that is. Tri meaning 3, like in tricycle and like, so that's not new to anyone. But in this case, from the Greek, the colon means the unit, the thing. So it's 3 things, 3 units, 3 segments, that sort of thing. And so there's a practice in writing where you put things together in 3s. Jokes are often done in 3s, but tricolon is any combination of 3 where you use 3 words that are closely linked together, or 3 phrases. You can even use 3 sentences. You can use 3 parts of a joke. It doesn't matter, but those are the 3 things. So, for example, the one that most people like to quote when they're talking about the tricolon is Dorothy Parker, who said, I require 3 things in a man. He must be handsome, ruthless, and stupid. Of course, the stupid makes it even more memorable, but 3 things. He must be thing 1, thing 2, and thing 3. That's a tricolon. There's just a whole bunch of them. But here's one: every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed. And that's Dwight Eisenhower who said that. So again, there now you see that it's not 3 words, it's 3 phrases: gun that is made, warship that is launched, rocket that is fired. There's a whole bunch of these, and once you start listening to them, listening for them, you'll see the power in them. Speakers use them all the time. Advertisers use them. There's an old Chevrolet ad from the 1940s that said, "Eye it, try it, buy it." Okay, so that's even a little poetic, but 3 elements to that. Public speakers do it because there's something in the human mind that is attracted to 3s, and it's easier to remember things done in 3s. Even E.B. White, who wrote Charlotte's Web, but in one of his articles he wrote, "In the still air, under the hard sun, gleam the flags and the banners and the drum majorette's knees." I'm not sure why the majorette's knees are gleaming, but there's 3 items there. Flags, banners, and drum majorette. So I can go on and give you just a whole bunch of these, but that's what a tricolon is. A little more on the serious side, from the Gettysburg Address, and there probably was not a better speechwriter than Abraham Lincoln. He wrote all his own stuff. But at the Gettysburg Address, he says, "But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate," that's 1. "We cannot consecrate," that's 2. "We cannot hallow this ground." So 3 things. And he does that several times in the speech. So there's even a joke that's done as a tricolon. So that's our term for this week.
And it's very big in rhetoric, like you say, in the spoken word, and the art of persuasion and argument. Uniquely Western idea, though. In a lot of Eastern cultures, they don't have the same kind of hang up, I guess, on 3 that we do in American culture. But like you say, there's something kind of ingrained in us that likes things done in 3. Oftentimes when we list things in 2, we're waiting for the 3rd thing. Or if we mention 4 things, people are like, "Hey, slow down, like back it up, going way too far now." But yeah, so I'd never called it tricolon. I've never heard it called that until tonight. I've always called it just the rule of 3, and I just kind of made that up. It was very, very awesome, and it's a terrible name. It's a very unimaginative name. There we go. That's the word I'm looking for. Imaginative.
Well, think about how much smarter you're going to seem now that you know what a tricolon is.
Yes, I cannot wait to try out for Jeopardy, where that knowledge will come in handy, I'm sure. But in composition, especially if you've got characters giving speeches or trying to persuade somebody, hey, there's 3 reasons we need to do X, Y, or Z. So good stuff. Moving on now to the meat of our cast. The meat of our cast, and the first thing I want to talk about is Flannery O'Connor's chicken.
Well, I'm going to tell you right up front. They say confession is good for the soul. It can be bad for the career, but confession is good for the soul. And I have never read Flannery O'Connor, so I am looking forward to the education coming my way. I've read some things about her, so never before has a son been so ashamed of a father.
You could tell me that you were gay and I wouldn't be as disappointed. Yeah. And it's weird now. I made it weird. Okay. So Flannery O'Connor is one of my all-time favorites. I can give you a list of her work, but I don't think I've read a bad story by her. One of most famous for her short stories. She wrote a novel, The Violent Bear It Away, and also another novel, Wise Blood. Wise Blood she wrote first. The Violent Bear It Away is the one that got all the critical acclaim, though I think Wise Blood in a lot of ways might actually be superior. But some really fantastic stuff. And she dealt a lot with the fallen state of man, redemption and grace and mercy, a lot of spiritual concepts. But she was very, very dark. You'd kind of categorize her with the Southern Gothic, and you can kind of trace that back to when she was 6 years old. And she trained at 6 years old. She trained a chicken of hers to walk backward. And so she had this chicken that would walk backward. It became quite the spectacle. The local news came out to cover it, and she just fell in love with being famous and having people talk about her, etc. And she said that that was kind of the defining moment for her. That element, that bizarre kind of ordeal of a chicken walking backward, that really fascinated her with other things that are both grotesque and bizarre. Now, I don't want you to misconstrue and think that she's writing stories like Edgar Allan Poe, but in a lot of ways, she's writing things that are a lot more chilling. They don't have kind of the same dark supernatural overtones. I guess they do, but they're different. Poe is more kind of monsters and torture, and Flannery O'Connor's more the fallen state of man, the darkness within each of us as human beings, kind of that real gritty darkness of what people are capable of doing. And of course, she's writing about the South, and so there's this whole element of the genteel South, and you've got kind of the class system there. She's writing during the time, heavily during the 50s, 60s, etc. So the civil rights movement is big, and the South was in this time of transition, and so she was very. She didn't pull any punches with her writing. That's what I really appreciate about her. She didn't pull any punches, and what she created was pretty fascinating. So the first thing that I want to tell you in regards to reading her, if you're interested in reading some of her stories, I think her most famous short story is called A Good Man is Hard to Find. You got to read it. I like Good Country People. The Life You Save May Be Your Own. And there's another one that I'm thinking of that the name is escaping me. Revelation is another one. Everything That Rises Must Converge. Of course, either of her novels would be great. But the real treasure for me is a book called Mystery and Manners, in which it's a collection of her essays and her speeches and her talks that she gave, her lectures at some pretty big name colleges about the art of writing fiction. And so if you're interested in how to write fiction, I've got this book. It's just all highlighted. It's just the whole thing is highlighted, which kind of defeats the purpose of highlighting. But I used up a lot of yellow ink on that book, and I still refer to it when I'm teaching creative writing. It's on my shelf. I pull it out. I've got pages, post-its on all the pages, and I just go there and find what I need. So many great lines, and it's a very kind of an academic look at writing. And so this is not necessarily for the beginning writer. If you've never written a complete short story, you've never finished a short story, you've never finished a novel, you're just getting your toes wet in the area of fiction, it might be a little bit much for you. But if you really want to study the craft, I kind of rate this as an advanced level book. It's so full of amazing things. It's really transformed my own writing. So I guess this is the portion of the podcast where I fangirl out, as I promised last week. I said I'd fangirl out about Flannery O'Connor. And there it is. I'm just absolutely in love with her book, Mystery Manners, and her stuff. So I would highly recommend that you get that.
Let's give just a little background for everyone. Because there might be one or two other people like me that's not familiar with Flannery O'Connor. So I did do a little research. So the era that she was writing in, she was born during the sort of the golden age of literature, 1925. So she was born when Fitzgerald and Hemingway and Thomas Wolfe and those kinds of folks were writing. But she also died quite young, I think at the age of 39. And you and I were talking before we went live with this, that once again we have found an author that dies early. So apparently, to be successful, you must be a heavy drinker and willing to die early. That's not true, of course, but it is one of the sad things.
Feels like it.
Yeah, sometimes you think that maybe that's a requirement. Learn some grammar and then get drunk, and then maybe you'll be successful. Because that's happened to so many people with that. So that's the age in which she's writing. Also, if memory serves, she wrote just two novels. So she wouldn't consider her, a lifetime novelist. So, but her forte was the short story and essays. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Like short stories, I think, is what she's. Yeah, that's what she's best known for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. And again, I think her most famous work is A Good Man is Hard to Find. You just Google that and you'll find all sorts of critical essays written about it. And one thing that I really liked about reading Mystery and Manners is she spoke to it, because the ending, one of them, we'll talk about endings, but man, all of her endings, she just hit them out of the park. And the ending of A Good Man Is Hard to Find is as close to the perfect ending as I think you'll ever find. And it's been much debated. There's a particular line in there. One of the characters says to another character, and it sets off this series of events, and there's this action that's completely unexpected, and but perfectly in character. We'll talk about that later, the unexpected but inevitable ending. A lot of my blog posts, if you follow my blog, a lot of them tie directly back to things that I've read in Mystery and Manners. And one of the first things that she talks about, to kind of give you an overall idea of her work, is this idea of this redemptive act. And she says in Mystery and Manners, there's something in us as storytellers and as listeners to stories that demand the redemptive act, that demands what falls at least be offered the chance to be restored. And I like that. I like that we're dealing with characters that are already fallen. They've made mistakes. If your character is perfect, then you haven't thought about your character long enough. But you've got a character that's fallen, that's flawed in some way. They've made some mistakes. And I love that she says they've got to at least be offered a chance to be restored. You'll hear a lot of people talking about, the formula for a novel is your character has to undergo some sort of change, right? They have to change for the better. And I think O'Connor's argument is, no, they don't, but they have to have the opportunity to change. There are several characters that change throughout the course of her short stories and novels, but the protagonists often didn't. And I think that's one of the interesting studies of her work, is which characters are changing. Why is the protagonist changing here, but the other characters around them are not? What characters do change? Which characters don't change? What is she saying about them in that way? But I think it's important for us to understand, especially when we think of our villains, right? Our villains should have an opportunity to be redeemed in some way. And it doesn't mean they have to, save the world and change their mind at the last minute. I'm thinking of Pinky and the Brain. You remember Pinky and the Brain, Pops?
Yes, I do.
So I love the Christmas episode, Pinky and the Brain, two laboratory mice who are trying to take over the world. And when they finally do, there was a Christmas episode where they finally take over the entire world, and Brain's got the entire world under his hypnosis, and he can give them any command that he wants to. And he's going to become king of the world. And he's overcome with the Christmas spirit. And he says, everyone have a Merry Christmas. And he turns them all loose and turns them all free. So you've got a kind of a villain who's got a moment. You don't have to have it be that profound, but a small redemption, at least a chance at small redemption, I think, is something to be looking for in your stories. How is my character flawed, and in what way can they be redeemed, and who can offer them, or what can offer them this chance at being redeemed? And I think that really amps up your story from good to great.
Yeah, we often teach that there's a character arc, and that your protagonist needs to change over the course of the story. And that's probably more academic thinking. There are many popular books in which that doesn't happen. The protagonist stays the same, not only through the book, but through the series. There might be some changes. We've mentioned Clive Cussler on this several times, and it was a good number of books before his protagonist had an event so overpowering to him that he ended up changing at least a little in that. I don't know if I'm going to ask this correctly, but when I was trying to do my research, they kept referring to her as a writer of grotesque. You were talking about the difference between her and Poe. Is this MFA talk, Masters of Fine Arts talk? Grotesque doesn't mean necessarily ugly, but showing maybe the negative side, the dirty side.
Yeah, the
unpleasant.
The darker side. Yeah, the darker side of humanity. But she also did write about people who were deformed. The life you save may be your own. There's a handyman who is, I think one arm is shorter than the other, or one leg is shorter than the other. I can't remember. Good Country People features a protagonist who's got a wooden leg. She's an amputee, which plays a huge part in the story. a lot of the characters are just blatantly racist, and so in that way they're somewhat grotesque. Some of them are very self-righteous to the detriment of those around them, and so they're spiritually grotesque. And so I think the word grotesque is not only the physical grotesqueries, but also the kind of the spiritual side of humanity, the grotesque nature of humanity, and the darkness that's in there. But again, it wasn't just all darkness. She also had that light in there, at least the part of it, the chance for the redemptive act. She actually talks about that, something that I call the intrusion of grace. And what she says is, our age not only our age not only does not have a very sharp eye for the almost imperceptible intrusions of grace, it no longer has much feeling for the nature of the violence which precedes and follows them. I do not want to equate the misfit, and this is a character in A Good Man is Hard to Find. And she says, I do not want to equate the misfit with the devil. I prefer to think that, however unlikely this may seem, the old lady's gesture, like the mustard seed, will grow to be a great crow-filled tree in the misfit's heart. And so I love that in the sense that she's actually talking about the ending of A Good Man is Hard to Find, so we get to know the author's perspective of that. But that even the character like the misfit, who is a little bit of backstory, basically finds families on the side of the road and kills them. That's what he does. He's got his gang of people. They're thugs, and they just murder people. Even he has an intrusion of grace, a moment of grace, this chance for redemption that's offered to him through this gesture that the old woman makes at the very end. Hard to read that story, but it's super profound. And so I like that. And she says that these intrusions of grace are often bookended by moments of violence. And so we talked about Charles Baxter's essay called Stillness. I've mentioned that before, where he says you've got this moment of stillness, and then on the other side are these moments of violence. And she's got kind of that same philosophy here, that sometimes you need the darkness in order to present the light. Sometimes you can't see the light unless you know exactly how dark a room is. And so that's kind of one of the things that she talks about.
Yeah, and to get that into writing, of course, is always tricky. So the takeaway in all of this is for the writer to understand that they may have to deal with negative things, dark things in their story. Even Old Yeller, for example, they have to face the idea of giving up the dog and the sadness and temptation to run off and those sorts of things. But that we as writers are taking our readers on a journey, and we're not always going to take them through the best part of town. You know, we load them up on the train that is our story, and we may go through dangerous neighborhoods. We may go to rundown neighborhoods, and it's our job to show that. And I'll tell you honestly, one of my problems, especially as I get older, is the difficulty of showing all these things in the writing, because when I'm writing, I can't distinguish between the reality and the fiction of it. And so I get moved, or I'll carry this stuff around, and I'll even admit that it's changed the way I think. So these things pop into my head, then I end up experiencing them, and I have to drive them out of my head. But nonetheless, the reader needs to be taken through that. And I was thinking, I was writing a blog post today on the Blue Ridge site. You see that under my name there. If you want to read that. But this is the 70th anniversary of the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. And back in 1984, a guy by the name of Wyden wrote a book it's called Day One, the day before and after the dropping of the bomb. And I remember, now this is nonfiction, but it was so well written, and it showed so much of what happened from a person on the ground, what they experienced, that it profoundly affected me. Now, I'm not getting into the pros and the cons of whether or not that should be done. It's just a matter of him taking me by the hand to Hiroshima and then later to Nagasaki and forcing me to see what happened on the ground. And I've never forgotten it. And I read it in 1984. So it was a remarkable book. Now, that's nonfiction. Of course, fiction, if anything else, should even go the next step in that, in helping people experience these things, which requires, as I think was saying here, this ability to perceive things, to look at things using our
Yeah,
senses.
exactly. And that's what she calls for, um, is for observation, very keen observation. But I like what you say. Sometimes we have to take them through the bad part of town, um, in order to know when you're in the good part of town. Sometimes you got to make people a little uncomfortable so that at the end, when they're comfortable, they understand why. And so I don't know if we're going to have time to get to it, but she even talks about that a little bit. She took a lot of heat because she was a Catholic, and the Catholic Church really came down on her hard for her use of language, her depiction of racist characters, and some of the atrocities that she wrote about, specifically "A Good Man Is Hard to Find." And she essentially defended herself and said, look, people are desensitized to this. If you want somebody to see something, you have to hold a magnifying glass up to it. Otherwise, they just turn a blind eye to it. So she says you have to exaggerate to get to that kernel of truth anymore, for people to see it and understand it. And so that was kind of her rationale for it. And I think, though, that also stems from her perception of the world and perceiving very subtle things that people like to keep buried, and being able to understand them and develop them and really bring them to light. She says the beginning of human knowledge is through the senses, and the fiction writer begins where human perception begins. He appeals through the senses, and you cannot appeal to the senses without abstractions. And this is very interesting to me because I talk a lot about the concrete and the abstract, right? So the concrete is the things that we can hear, smell, taste, touch, and see, our five senses. It's all concrete. But abstractions are things like power, hate, love, fear, justice, and righteousness. And she's saying that you can't appeal to somebody's senses without abstractions. And so she kind of says you have to use them both. And you can't do that without using figurative language of some kind. And so, thereby she's kind of inadvertently advocating for figurative language. But I like that she acknowledges there has to be both. You can't just have a story with only sensory input. You have to have one with sensory input that appeals to the abstractions as well. Something to keep in mind. How am I exploring this scene emotionally? How am I exploring it physically? And how am I exploring it in terms of other abstractions, larger abstractions like power, hate, love, fear, justice, righteousness, etc. How is my scene working on multiple levels? It's a good question to ask.
Yeah. And getting the abstract sometimes is a challenge for writers, because you almost want to quantify power. I mean, there's no such thing as 2 quarts of love, half a ton of hate, and so all you can do is describe. And then your words are going to be the things that are going to carry the intensity, the length, the depth of those emotions, those intangible things, so that the reader can experience them. Yeah, some good stuff there.
Yeah, a lot of this is just, I feel like a lot of this is pretty self-explanatory, but I guess it's not. I mean, some of it you have to kind of really dig into. And it's definitely one of those books that the more I dig into it, the more I find. So important to keep those sensory details, the abstractions, all working on the page at the same time. She also says fiction is about everything human, and we are made out of dust. And if you scorn getting yourself dusty, then you shouldn't try to write fiction. This is kind of where she talks about I love that. It's like, again, people, why do you write about such dark things? We're made of dust. Like, that's who we are as a people. If you want to get into the spiritual nature, we could talk about being a fallen people. But even if you're not a spiritual type of a person, you can look around you and say that humanity is not exactly kind to each other, and that we are often dirty in our dealings with each other. And so I like that. What is fiction? In a lot of ways, fiction reflects society. I think fiction can change society by holding up a mirror to what it is. And I think she did that in a lot of ways. It presented the reflection on a part of humanity that people didn't like to look at, you know. But in so doing, people could see that is grotesque, and that is something that I need to have looked at, rather than simply trying to ignore it. By calling attention to it through her fiction, I think it did a lot to really revolutionize a lot of the way people interact with one another. And so I think she's kind of doing this in twofold. She's saying, first of all, when you're writing fiction, people are dirty. Make sure your characters are dirty, and I don't mean that in a weird or sordid or kind of a strange sense. I just simply mean they're flawed characters. How are they flawed? Everybody's flawed in a different way. Try and figure that out. In their interactions with other people, you've got two flawed characters trying to interact. It's not going to be the perfect relationship. So trying to figure that out, the unique ways that your characters are flawed, is going to help you kind of understand the type of dirt, if you will, that your fiction is really taking a look at. And this is where you can start going from a simple story to something that might transcend time and start working on a symbolic level and start touching people in almost a spiritual way, but in a very abstract kind of a way that's going to leave a very tangible emotional feeling for them. But it's going to move them, and it's going to make them think about things and take notice, and maybe even perish the thought, reflect on their own lives and who they are as a person. So fiction, I think, has a very prominent role here. And I think that's what she's saying here is, when you're writing fiction, don't neglect your responsibilities to reflect humanity as it is, but also how it can be. But I think for her, it's more about how humanity actually is.
You know, from time to time, we encounter somebody who says, well, I don't read novels because it's a waste of time. If I'm going to read, I'm going to read something that's real. And what I always remind those folks is the first novel to sell over 1 million copies was Uncle Tom's Cabin, Harriet Beecher Stowe. And now this may be anecdotal. We don't know if it's actually true, but apparently when Lincoln met her, he said, so this is the little woman that started this great big war. Now, we don't know if he really said that or if it was something fabricated a few years later. But nonetheless, the point is, she showed slavery in a very realistic way. Now, it's fallen on hard times. I probably ought to go ahead and put that parentheses in because a lot of stereotypes come out of that book. But it is a book of its time, and that's what people thought, and that's the way people acted at that time. It's don't judge the past by today. But nonetheless, it shone a light on some of the dangers, and others did that. Shelley's Frankenstein was a response to science run amok. There was a fear about that, and that's what they do is they show how bad things can get, or how bad things are. In the case of Uncle Tom's Cabin and others, books like that. So there's a great power to that. So I would say that she's spot on with this idea of looking at the world and then being willing to show it, dirt and all.
Absolutely. Steinbeck. You can talk about dirty writing, and the first few pages of Grapes of Wrath is the Dust Bowl. But, almost everything that Steinbeck wrote was a reflection on humanity and society, and very instrumental in a lot of the social changes that we've seen. Positive social changes that we've seen can be traced back to his literature. Flannery O'Connor, I got a few more things here that I want. There's definitely one I want to get to. There's 3 more that I want to get to, for sure. And again, we'll do like we did last week, where if we run out of time, all the notes are going to be up on aarongansky.com. You can just check my blog, and they'll all be up there. So if we don't get to everything tonight, you'll find it there. But she mentions what she calls the world within the object, and I love this because it's a challenge for me. She says, the longer you look at one object, the more of the world you see in it. And it is well to remember that the serious fiction writer always writes about the whole world, no matter how limited his particular scene. And I adore that. The fact that I'm writing a simple scene about an old woman sitting in a chair, but you're telling me that this has to suggest the entire world? Hmm. What if I'm just writing about a water bottle sitting on a table? Well, if we really use our senses, as she encourages us to do, and we truly study that water bottle, we're going to see a few things. We're going to see some condensation on the plastic bottle, which tells us about the water cycle, shows us the water cycle. We can look at the screw top cap and talk about intelligent design, function, order. We can look at the blue label on the water bottle, and we could talk about the marketing efforts that were made with this, why they chose that particular color, what types of emotions that color evokes, what it says to the consumer. And when we see the barcode on it, we also understand that there's a larger economy here that's driven by technology. So even something as simple as a water bottle sitting on a table suggests the world in which it exists. And you want to think of that. I would suggest this for those scenes where you go back and you reread them and you go, well, this scene is just falling flat. Ask yourself, what part of the world is this suggesting? How is this scene suggesting the world? In what ways can it suggest the world? And really study your scene in that way. Really try and be present in the scene and explore it with your five senses and think about the abstractions that it suggests. And that's where you start working. You take a simple water bottle, and the next thing you know, it becomes more than a water bottle. It becomes a symbol in the story, and it plays a major role in the story somehow. You think of something like The Lord of the Flies. You've got a conch shell, but it's a lot more than just a conch shell. It's order and reason and civilization and society, and all of these things, and power, all rolled up into one thing. And so you think of something simple, and you think of how it's not truly simple. Very interesting to challenge ourselves with that thought.
Yeah, there's always more to see. And I think it is the job of the writer to see more than what most people see, and then to point it out in a creative way.
Yeah, exactly. Here's a washing machine. It washes clothes. We probably need a little bit more than that. Yeah, an interesting way. I talk about the ordinary, extraordinary, and extraordinary, ordinary. You take something very ordinary and you make it sound extraordinary. That's our job as writers, to take something simple and make it seem transcendent in some way. Can't do it without your senses. And guys, this isn't easy. You have to roll up your sleeves. I've done it before, and I really think that it's transformed my writing. On the pieces that I've written that have really taken all of her advice to heart, I'm telling you, they've turned out to be my best short stories. By far, and my novels in a lot of ways have benefited from what I've learned from her. So she talks about the habit of art, and she says teaching any kind of writing is largely a matter of helping the student develop the habit of art. I think this is more than just a discipline, although it is that. I think it is a way of looking at the created world and using the senses so as to make them find as much meaning as possible in things. So it kind of piggybacks on this idea of using your senses. But I love that word, the habit of art, and that she says it's more than just discipline, even though it is still discipline. By far, the blog post that I wrote that got the most interaction was one called The Habit of Art, where I basically took this quote and I said, look, if you want to be a writer, you have to write every day. You've got to make it your job. You've got to sit down. You've got to do it. And I got so many comments about, oh, no. That's how you get terrible writing. You can only write when you're inspired. You should only write if you've got an idea for a story. And if you don't, you shouldn't write. And I thought, well, then 90% of the world's greatest novels would never have been written. I mean, if you think that Hemingway wrote only when he was inspired, the boy put out books. Same with Fitzgerald. Was he inspired every day when he was writing The Great Gatsby? No, but he was inspired at times, and he maximized that inspiration. But you've got to develop a habit of art. If you don't have a habit of working and practicing your art, then your art will never develop fully. And so this is always encouraging to me, and I use this to kind of motivate myself when I don't feel like writing. I keep thinking I've got to make it a habit. I have to make it a habit. And the only way something becomes a habit is when you do it a lot, over and over and over again, even when you don't want to do it. So Make it a habit.
Yeah, I have little patience with those that say that you have to be inspired before you write. I'm pretty sure the people who say that will never finish a book. There's an old line: "Is you don't wait for your muse. You grab the little bugger by the collar and drag him into the office, and you sit down and start writing." Or who was it that said, "I only write when I'm inspired." Fortunately, I'm inspired at 9 a.m. every morning. And I would add to that, whether I want to be inspired or not. That's the thing. I'm here to do this. I need to do it.
Absolutely. And I think what you'll find is that inspiration is a fickle mistress. I don't know if I can use that term, but she doesn't come around unless you flirt with her a little bit. And so I feel like I'm skating on some thin ice here, but allow me to elaborate. I find I'm not inspired until I've already written. You know what I'm saying? If I haven't written anything, I'm more inspired to play video games and more inspired to do something else, play Candy Crush on my phone, something like that. That's what inspires me. I'm tired. I, want to just veg out and not think about anything. But if I want to be a writer, I've got to write. And funny thing happens when I write. I become inspired. But usually it's about 400 or 500 words into the scene where I go, inspiration is finally here. Now I can finish it strong and fix the other parts later. And so if you're waiting to be inspired to write, you're going to be waiting for a long time. Instead, try flirting with the muse and see if she doesn't come around a little bit quicker for you.
Or just tell the muse you're going to leave them behind. Just tell the muse, I'm leaving you behind. There's more muses out there. Yeah, that's absolutely right. When I was doing a lot of public speaking, I always noticed that as I prepared, I was always a little nervous. And when I got to where I was going to be to speak, I would have some nerves. But the moment I stood up and I uttered the first sentence, I was there. I was in the groove. And that feeling of confidence would never come to me when I'm sitting down waiting to get up to speak. It always came to me after one or two lines, once I heard my voice. And I've noticed in my writing, and I sit down and I just don't feel like writing. I don't know where I'm going to head with this. The time I write 2 lines, it begins to flow. It unlocks the door a little bit more. And then next thing I know, I'm moving right along. And that's right. That's that practice of art. When I used to bicycle a lot, I always noticed I hated the first half mile. It was painful. After the first half mile, it was tolerable. After the first mile, I was good to go. But I always had to get through those first 2 stages before I could start enjoying the ride. So sometimes that's the way it is with writing. The practice, the habit of art, I think is a great phrase. It is a habit. You sit down, you do it.
Yeah, and then you get your second win, right? You know, like you're talking about in the bike riding, you got to wait till you get your second win, but it doesn't come until you've had your first win. So work with that, The last one I want to get to, and I have a feeling we're going to be talking about this for quite a bit. Just a quick teaser before we get to it. She does champion character-driven stories, and she also champions discovery writers. She was very much a discovery writer. Reading Mystery and Manners is great. Reading Mystery and Manners after you've read a lot of her short works and her novels is even better, because you're like, I was right about that, or I totally missed that. Now I need to go read it again. So really great kind of a peek behind the curtain. So that I'll have some notes on that on the show notes. But the one I want to talk about is the unexpected but inevitable ending. And this is, I think, very evident in her stories, and I'll give some other popular examples where you can see it as well. But she says, I often ask myself, what makes a story work and what makes it hold up as a story? And I've decided that it is probably some action, some gesture of a character that is unlike any other in the story, one which indicates where the real heart of the story lies. This would have to be an action or a gesture which is both totally right and unexpected. It would have to be one that was both in character and beyond character. It would have to suggest both the world and eternity. Oh, okay, sure, that's pretty easy. So I think that clears everything up. You ready to go, Pops? Just gonna wrap it up now, or?
Yeah, you might have to unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I use the term unexpected but inevitable. So if we think about A Good Man is Hard to Find, which is her definitive work, many would argue. Um, Again, what makes it work is that ending. And it's this gesture that the old woman makes. And again, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but she makes a particular gesture. And this gesture has been long talked about, something that she says to the misfit that immediately propels the reader to think the story is going to end in a certain way. And the story does not end that way. And then you read the ending and you go, oh, man, I thought it was going to go the other direction. But of course it couldn't. There's no way. When you go back and you reread the story, no, this was the only ending that could work. It had to end this way, which we could talk about is a really good use of foreshadowing because she sets it all up. But yet at the same time, she toys with the reader in the sense that she builds up a sense that the story is going to take a different direction. This is not a simple twist ending. Don't confuse this with I don't like twist endings where you essentially lie to the reader for 3/4 of the book, and then at the last 10 pages you pull a rabbit out of your hat and no, it was the butler all along, blah blah blah. That's just bad writing. But if you think of something like The Sixth Sense, and some people love it, some people hate it. People, oh, I saw the ending coming a mile away. Well, if you know there's a trick ending, then you're looking for it, and then you're probably not surprised. But when Bruce Willis delivers that line, spoiler alert, or when Bruce Willis finally discovers that he is in fact dead and has been dead throughout the entire movie, it's a realization for the audience, and they go, no, you're alive. But then when you go back and you look at everything, the way they set everything up, the only person he ever interacts with after the initial incident is that kid. And the kid tells you, I see dead people, and there it is. And so sure, now it's easy to see, but when you think about that and you think about that ending where of course he's dead, he was shot like that. He was shot like right in the stomach. A lot of damage there. He's not surviving. Of course he's dead. But we were led to believe, or we wanted to believe that he was still alive. And so that may not be the best example, but it is an example. Flannery O'Connor's done similar things in other stories. The life you save may be your own. You think the story is taking one direction, it takes a completely different direction. Good Country People, I love this one. It has to do with the theft of a wooden leg. So, I mean, you can't get much better than that. But again, you get to the ending and you go, yeah, it had to end that way, but I just really thought it was going someplace else. Another popular example, Everything That Rises Must Converge. Good Country People, I just said that. Another short story that's available on Amazon for $1 is called An Affair to Forget by one Aaron Gansky. I suggest you buy it. And that's got an unexpected but inevitable ending. And so when you read it, you think it's going to end one way, and it kind of takes a different turn. I remember the day, the time. I can't tell you on the calendar, but I remember I was at church. Josiah was very, very young. We were sitting with him in the cry room, and that's when it hit me. I finally know how to end this story. I wrote a story originally called Leaving Tennessee, which is now published as An Affair to Forget. And the ending, when I first turned it in to Brett Anthony Johnston, when he was my teacher at my professor at Cal State San Bernardino, he said, "You have the wrong ending." And I thought, well, how arrogant of you to tell me that I have the wrong ending on my story. Of course, he's an incredible writer, and he was exactly right. So once I got past myself and said, okay, if this is the wrong ending, what's the right ending? He said, here's why the ending fails. And he listed the 3 reasons. And I said, okay, so I've got to do something that doesn't do any of those 3 things. So I'm telling you, I rewrote the story 14, 15, 16 times. I could never get the ending just right. And then I found it that moment in church. And I immediately, it was the back of the bulletin. I started scrawling the ending in my chicken scratch. I got home, I jumped on the computer, I typed it up, and I revised it. And I would still maintain that that's probably the best ending to a short story that I've written. And I can tell you with every short fiction that I've written, I have those words, unexpected but inevitable, in my mind when I get to the end every time. What is the unexpected but inevitable ending? What is this gesture? What is this action that is, both within character, but also beyond character. Where does the character reach beyond themselves? How does the character act in such a way that they didn't imagine they would act? How are they're put in a situation that's really going to test who they are as a person? How are they going to behave? What are they going to learn about themselves at that moment? Those are some pretty deep questions to ask yourself about your characters and your story. But I think if you really want to find the sublime ending, that just perfect bow for your story, I think it lies somewhere in there. The unexpected but inevitable ending.
And it's always great, especially with discovery writers, when the ending surprises them. But then they look at all the elements, and all the elements are there, and it had to be that way. It just had to be that way. And that's happened to me too, Aaron. I've been driving down the road going, I don't know what to do with this. And then boom, there it is. Or it usually comes when you least expect it, when you stop thinking about it. I've had plot problems like that, and the answers come to me when I've been out with your mom having dinner. This had nothing to do with the dinner. It just decides to show itself at that time, and then it all begins to fall together. So that is both the adventure, the joy, and the painful drawback of being a discovery, intuitive kind of writer.
Yeah, the way I often come to my endings is I'll ask my wife, how does this end? And she'll go, it ends like this. And I go, no, you're wrong. How does this end? And she's like, it ends like this. No, you're wrong. How does it end? By now, she's very patient, which is good because she's got a brown belt in karate. So if she wasn't patient, I would be broken into tiny pieces. But she'll usually say something. Well, maybe it ends like this. I go, no, you're wrong. But what if it were this? And what if it were that? And if I had this, and then if that happened, and then the wheels start to go. And so I find talking about it out loud. And she just asks me simple questions. What's happened so far? Well, who are your characters? What do your characters want? Just simple questions that you tend to stop asking yourself after a while because you get comfortable with your characters and you think you know them. Here's another great way, another good exercise that you can do. We're going a little bit over time here, but I'll wrap it up real quick. If you ever find yourself too comfortable with your characters, I really suggest that you ask yourself what they've been lying about. And if you think your character has not been lying to you, they have. And so sometimes you ask yourself, what are you lying about? Why have you been lying about this whole time? And that often will unlock your character to you in a way that you'll understand them in a way you hadn't understood them, that you had not understood them before. And it will help you to find that action or that gesture, which is now beyond character. It's in character. You'll understand why it's in character now, but it was beyond the character that you originally understood when you first started writing the book. You've got to find that. I think I found that for my current work in progress, Harrison Sawyer, so I'm pretty excited. I actually wrote the ending a few weeks ago. It's the first time I've ever written the ending before I actually got to the ending. So we'll see if it stays the same. But there we go. So we missed a couple points, not a lot, not as many as we missed last week, but we got a couple. They'll be on the show notes. And our chat room pops has been saying some very positive things about my writing in particular. Molly Jo is giving a shout out for Leaving Tennessee, which is a chapter in The Bargain. So you can, if you buy The Bargain, you'll get an Affair to Forget in one of the chapters under the name Leaving Tennessee. So it's kind of a 2-for-1. So just go ahead and buy The Bargain. But a lot of good love for The Habit of Art. Quotidian Light is here, and she says, the habit of art is so important, but so is allowing silence. I get a lot of writing done when I'm not writing, but when I'm not writing, I have to be creative in other ways and read challenging works and walk in the woods and look at visual art. See, that's just like, that's what Flannery O'Connor would say. Studying things with all 5 of your senses. And when I begin writing again, I am full.
It's one reason I go to movies. I often get plot answers at the movies. Has nothing to do with the movie. I don't get it from the movie. I get it from seeing story played out in front of me, and that tends to unlock the doors. So yeah. And that's the old line about a writer. If you see a writer staring out the window, you know what he or she is doing. They're working. Yeah, they're working. Staring at the window is working. You see them at Starbucks sipping coffee and staring at the table. They're working. It's stuff that's going on the back of the head.
I'll be driving down the road and my wife will have a conversation with me, and about 20 minutes into it, I'll realize that she's been talking to me. I'll kind of look at her and, what was that? And she's like, "Are you in Al Ruja?" "Yeah, I'm sorry. I was just having an epic battle." So, Quotidian Light, Maya Good is her name. She's the host of Literary Roadhouse. Great
Yes.
little podcast. So if you haven't read any Flannery O'Connor, I'm going to humbly suggest that Maya Good suggest to her co-hosts that they cover a Flannery O'Connor story. That's my subtle hint there. And some great stuff. So some great, really intelligent analysis of some great works of art, some great short stories. So that's definitely something you want on your podcast. I'll give you a shout out there. But we are for sure out of time now, Pop. So let's go ahead and wrap it up, unless you have any last minute questions, comments, or concerns.
No, next week is something special, isn't it?
It is something special. Thank you for reminding us. Tune in next week for our 100th episode extravaganza. We're going to do something amazing, but we are both Discovery writers, so we have no idea what amazing thing that we're going to do.
There'll be
So
fireworks. There'll be watermelon. There'll be, I don't know.
There will be a Google Hangouts for sure, and definitely an audio podcast to go with it. Beyond that, we don't know. But so join us for that. We're looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun. It'll be atypical. We're probably not going to cover a lot of writing advice, but we'll probably talk, obviously, still about writing and the show and interactions and stuff like that. So, Pops, how can people get in touch with you?
It'll be a party. Invite your friends. Well,
Please do.
Yeah, invite your friends for the 100th. Who knows? We may even have guests. Who knows? They can get information about me through altongansky.com, or if you want to read the latest blog post I put up on the Writers Conference site, you can see that if you're watching, you can see the address below my name. It's brmcwc.com, Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference.com. And today I was blogging about what the difference is between fiction and nonfiction, and you might be surprised at the answer.
Is it non and a hyphen? Is that the difference?
It's that's true. The non is the difference.
Okay.
We'll talk about that anon. Sorry.
Okay, there it is.
Literary joke. Yeah, literary.
Set up.
Yeah.
Well done, Pops. All right. And I'm Aaron Gansky. You guys can find me on aarongansky.com. And again, the book grabber, if you want to get a jump start on reading The Hand of Adonai for, I believe it's free. It's at bookgrabber, GRABBR.com/book/3450. You can start reading that so that on August 25th when it releases, and you can order the Kindle version and all that. You can actually pre-order the Kindle version now. You'll be able to pick up where you left off. So thank you all for listening. And until next week, good writing.